Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. Today's review is sponsored by the letter G, and it is the fourth in my alphabet soup TBR. That is, the author's surname for each book in this TBR begins with a different letter of the alphabet. Today, we're also looking at a postmodern novel. Now, those used to be words that frightened me off, but I think over time, I'm gradually getting less and less uncomfortable. Today we are reviewing Maya by Jostein Gaarder, translated into English by James Anderson. It was published in 1999, 346 pages, and that was my paperback edition. I will say the font was a good size, so that 346, you can probably take it down a little bit, closer to 300. Prices online are very good. This book has, I think it still is in print, but it's not so popular now, and so it's very easy to get an inexpensive secondhand copy online, and you can see the cheapest that I found was very, very reasonable. And as I say, it is postmodern metafiction. My copy, actually, it was owned by my father. He was a reader, and he's probably the biggest reason that I'm also a reader. But he and I were different in the way we read books. My dad would find a book randomly. I never knew quite what drew him to the books that he picked in the first place. We never had talked about that. But if he liked a book, that was it. He was the author's #1 fan from then on, and he would buy and read through everything else that they'd written. His first Jostein Gaarder novel was Sophie's World, which was Gaarder's best-selling book. He recommended Sophie's World to me in the 1990s. I read it. I loved it. I really should reread it, but I never read any of Gaarder's other novels. After my father died in 2015, I had a look through his library. It was too big by far for me to consider shipping all his books to the UK. I think I picked about maybe a dozen books, although when I checked my bookshelves shortly after I finished Maya, I found that 3 of the books that I brought back from his collection were novels by Jostein Gaarder. I cannot tell you a great deal about the author. Gaarder seems to be the kind of man, and many authors I'm finding now are protecting their privacy very much. Now, Gaarder seems to have done this long before it became so much more of a challenge with the internet. He was born in 1952 in Oslo, Norway. He went to Oslo Cathedral School, and then he went on to the University of Oslo and graduated in 1976, having studied Scandinavian languages and theology, of all things. His parents were both teachers as well. His father was a school head teacher. So he started teaching in high school after he finished university. His first books that were published in the 1990s were aimed at children. And so his best-known adult novel, 1991, Sophie's World, came out, and it was translated into English in 1995, and it remains, I understand, one of the most commercially successful Norwegian novels outside Norway, and it has been adapted into a film and a PC game. Let's get into the meat of things and talk about the structure. The first clue this novel gives you that things are not going to be quite what they seem is the opening, in which the narrator tells you that he is on the Fijian island of Tuveni. This island is one of many land masses that just happen to be where the 180th meridian runs, the line of longitude runs down the globe. The 180th meridian used to be the international date line. If you look on a contemporary map, you will see that many diversions have been made in this. It's no longer a line, really. It's a strange meandering thing. But mostly the 180th still runs straight. And as it happens, Tuveni is in this auspicious position where the 180th meridian actually cuts the island quite neatly in half. And it gives them a good reason to attract tourists so that they can go and say that they have time traveled. And I'll show you a photo here. This is the sign which straddles the meridian, and it allows tourists, to cross over from today into yesterday. Now that's just one setting though. The second setting for the action in this novel is Spain, in particular Madrid, and in particular in Madrid, the Prado Gallery. And in particular in the Prado Gallery, the hall that is devoted to the collection of paintings by Francisco Goya. You will spend time in other locations around Spain, in particular Seville and Salamanca, but it is the Goya Museum that is going to be significant. Now, the setting in terms of time, I'm going to say, oh my, time. You've probably already guessed that time is going to be interesting here. Yes, it is. The story, or rather, I have to say stories, but I don't really want to give you more detail on that until we get to the rabbit hole. So let's just talk about the main storyline in the novel. It's contemporary with Jostein Gaarder's actual writing of the book. So late 1990s, the new millennium is an event that everyone is anticipating. But to solve a central mystery within the narrative, it's also going to be necessary for readers to be taken back in time 200 years and to understand a folk legend and its possible connection with events that were happening in the story time present, if you follow. Regarding narrative, this is a framed narrative, but you must beware the frame. The frame is constructed very cleverly to create an illusion. Some might say a trick, but we'll talk about that later. This is fitting, though, because the principal characters early on in the novel, they start discussing the Indian Vedanta philosophy. And within that philosophy, there is a concept that what we perceive as reality, that is, all of us being separate individuals, separate from things, separate from the elements that make up our physical environment, that all that is an illusion. I'd like to read a quote now from page 129 of the book where one of the characters just explains that idea. Then it was Laura's turn. Laura made no secret of the fact that she'd derived much of the inspiration for her view of life from Indian philosophy, especially Vedanta, one of the 6 orthodox schools, or more precisely, Kaval Advaita, a term that derived from the philosopher Shankara, who lived in India early in the 19th century. Kaval Advaita meant absolute non-dualism, Laura told us. She went on to declare that there was only one reality, which the Indians called Brahman or Mahatman, meaning world soul, or more literally, the great soul. Brahman was eternal, indivisible, and non-material. So all of John's questions had one answer, and only one answer, because Brahman was the answer to all the questions he'd posed. Oh, hell, Laura, sighed Bill, the man who'd expressed an almost naive scientific optimism. But Laura wouldn't let herself be deflected. She explained that all variety was merely an illusion that causes our daily lives to reveal the world as multifaceted, she said. An illusion the Indians have for thousands of years called Maya. So you see, that's where the title comes from. So all this business about illusion. The prologue at the very beginning of the novel is written by a character named John Spook, and you find out that he is a writer. And as you get near the end of the prologue, you realize that what he wants to do is read you a letter that he somehow obtained from one of the other characters named Frank Anderson. It's a letter that Frank wrote to his wife. And really, most of the novel is this letter Frank wrote to his wife. So you think at first that the structure is going to be very simple. You think, okay, John is going to open with a prologue. Then we are going to switch to reading the letter from Frank to his wife. Then probably that will resolve somehow, and we will get another epilogue by John Spook, perhaps. But after page 200, you start to get hints in the text which make you realize, hey, wait a second, the way I've been seeing things here isn't the way things actually are. And if you've read any Jostein Gaarder before this, you'll already be expecting, I think, some kind of puzzle. Gaarder is known for his books playing with your mind a little bit and getting the reader to question their own thinking. Number of characters isn't challenging. You meet about 8 people at the resort in Tuveni, where the action begins, and you get a lot of time to meet them and get to know them. And then the story shifts from Norway to Spain, and it's here that the past gets recounted, and then you have to meet maybe another 8 personalities from history. Regarding mobility, all the characters are travelers, it seems, and the question in this novel is whether or not some of them have traveled longer on Earth than mortals would be expected to do, or, to be more accurate, whether some of them are or are not mortal. There's a lot of philosophical journeying as well, one or more characters attempting to justify their views or just trying to move on from something tragic that has happened to them. Regarding representation, there is a Romani character who has a special place in this story. Now, I know precious little about the Romani in Europe. All I really have, I think, are white European stereotypes, that see a sort of mysteriousness to the Romani, that attribute kind of a magical aspect to these people. Now, Jostein Gaarder makes use of this stereotype. The Romani character provides the great mystery that interests John Spook and also Frank Anderson. Now, how a Romani reader would regard this portrayal, I really don't know. If we use Elaine Castillo's question and we ask, who is the expected reader of this novel, I think the answer is Northern white Europeans, or their émigré descendants who are now in North America, the ones who are outside of Romani culture. Regarding problematic content, there is not a great deal, and yet Maya is a book that is considering the difficulties of being mortal, and in particular the pain of losing people that you love and reaching old age, wondering how long you are going to live. And among the characters, there is a recent widower who's just reached that stage where they feel that they can disturb the clothing and the possessions of their late wife, and, thinking what kind of life they're going to live without her. There's also a man who splits up with his wife after they lose their child in an accidental death, and that is horrible. If you have lost a child, you might have a tough time with this book. There's also a young couple where the wife miscarries and they have to deal with that. All these deaths, however, are described in the past tense. They are things the characters have gone through rather than are going to go through while you read, but they're dealing with that pain. Rabbit hole time. Now, some of you might be going, I never really did understand the term metafiction. And for ages, I really thought, I don't know what's going on here. In a way, metafiction is like, if you could imagine someone coming from another planet, a planet where they have no concept of either writing or reading fiction or telling stories at all, except to recount things that actually happened. Now they come down and we introduce them to novels and drama on stage and television programs which are fictional. And what must they think? They must want to make fun of us and go, this is crazy. A man sits down at a word processor and he completely invents people and lives that they live, and none of it has really happened. And yet you purchase the written work that they complete and you read it. And when you read it, you behave as if it's really happening while you are reading it, and you are completely absorbed and you have emotional reactions to it, and you remember the people perhaps long after you finish the book as if you had met them in real life. So in the same way, metafiction is kind of saying, isn't this a crazy thing that we do? And the way that Maya chooses to do it, I think is quite cool. And I made a little diagram just to kind of give you an idea of how it's playing with the concept. Here's my picture. It may not make sense just at a glance, but bear with and I'll talk it through. We start in the top left-hand corner. We know that in real life, I can't discuss Indian philosophy, so I'm not even going to go into the idea that real life for us might in fact be an illusion. So we will just say, for the purposes of the discussion, in real life, Jostein Gaarder is an author, and he sat down and he created a novel, and the novel has a narrator. So we move to the right. That narrator is John Spook. Now, he's fictional. He's not real. He's an illusion. He's also a character in the novel. So he's also having his own actions and his own speech as a character. However, John Spook is also, this is where we drop down to the second level of this diagram, he is also an author. He tells us this. And as part of a book he seems to be writing, so within the book that Jostein Gaarder is writing is John Spook, who's also writing a book, and he has also invented his own narrator. So the narrator has invented a narrator. That narrator in John Spook's book is Frank Anderson. He narrates a great deal of the second part of the framed narrative. And Frank Anderson and John Spook, or we're not really sure which, they've also created these characters called Jose and Anna. And they're fictional, but in the lives of John Spook and Frank Anderson, they are real people. But they are characters in the novel that John has written, even though he also knows them as real people. I hope if you're finding yourself struggling now, it's okay. You're allowed to laugh at the ridiculousness of this. But now we go down to the third level, because Frank Anderson, who is, if you're following me now, the narrator of the book that John Spook is writing, who is narrator within the book that Jostein Gaarder is writing, Frank Anderson is also an author, because most of the text that we read are letters or emails he's written to his wife. So he is also an author within this novel, and he's creating something as well. There's also another aspect to the novel called the manifesto, and that's being written by these characters called Jose and Anna. They write something called a manifesto, so they're authors as well, even though they're also characters. And if you're now starting to feel a bit dizzy, that's expected. That's what Maya's trying to do, is to make you realize how you can spiral into levels of illusion upon illusion upon illusion. And in that way, this is how this novel does metafiction. Okay, so having explained all that, I could imagine plenty of viewers right now sitting back and going, why do we need metafiction? Well, I'll say this. I enjoy metafiction, but I could not make it more than a tiny part of my reading diet. And here's why. I was watching the channel Willow Talks Books a couple of days ago, and the video she made was called Reading Rubbish Books is Good for You. And the gist of the video, she was saying that reading or watching bad examples of storytelling, it's a good thing because it gives the experienced reader the opportunity to exercise their critical faculties, okay? But if we move one level above bad storytelling, we have good storytelling, and good storytelling consists of thousands of novels and plays, television scripts, etc. Metafiction kind of is a level above that. It's wanting the reader to be aware of this whole ritual that we call creating a story and consuming a story, because we need to remember, or at least metafiction wants us to remember, that these are acts of two real people, the author creating the illusion in text, and then us, the reader, coming to the text and participating imaginatively to make that illusion within our own minds. And that this ritual that we participate in, it's something with agreed expectations. Every time you come to a television show or a film or a book, you have in your mind expectations about what is going to come from this form of illusion making. And I've chosen the word ritual very deliberately because we can draw a lot of comparisons, I think, between reading a novel or consuming any kind of story and undergoing a religious ritual of some kind. As with a religious ritual, there is a time and a place for starting, is there not? And at the point that any of us starts a novel, we do, if you think about it, we shed our ego. We leave our everyday self outside of those book covers and we step into the reality of the story. And just as we would in a religious ritual. We prepare ourselves to have an experience that is outside ourselves, beyond ourselves, possibly greater than ourselves. And the story puts us through an ordeal, a virtual ordeal, as we're reading and we go through whatever the author makes their characters go through, right? We willingly submit to this process. We let the story work our emotions, and we experience tension and relief, confusion, fear, surprise, disgust, horror, every emotion that can be experienced. And at the same time, we might also be asked by the story to think, to help with solving a problem, or to consider whether we agree with characters' decisions. The virtuality of all this is extremely powerful. I mean, don't we know it? Metafiction is kind of a reality check. The kind of books that are metafiction, they don't really let us forget the real world, and they find ways to remind us that we're participating in this ritual called the reading experience. And I'd also like to add that I think, in a way, bad storytelling can be like metafiction. And we've all lived through this, right? You've chosen a book, and for whatever reason, you don't find that it is well put together. And as a result, do you not find then, if you're reading a book that you're not enjoying, that the immersive ritual, it's kind of diluted, or it only lasts partway through and then you feel the spell wearing off, don't you? You know all this, and we realize then, at that moment, we realize that the book that we've chosen is a product of a person who doesn't quite have the skill to make that ritual experience beyond ourselves. Now, I could go one step further and suggest, if I carry on with this way of thinking, I could say, well, then metafiction must be a form of bad fiction, right? Because you can never quite lose yourself. You can never quite forget who you are and what is actually going on while you've got this book open in front of you. The difference, I would say, though, is that, the author of metafiction should be 100% aware of exactly what they are creating, that the book is self-consciously constructed so that it doesn't create a conventional reading ritual experience. Now, the author of what you might call ordinary old bad fiction, they might have been writing, hoping or thinking that they are creating that kind of ritual experience, but they don't have the ability to bring it off, to make the ritual, the out-of-body, ego put away behind you experience. They don't have the skill to make that foolproof. In the final analysis, if I was going to sum up, what I would say is, for me, the reason I would want to keep my metafictional reading minimal is because I think the foolproof reading ritual experience, for me, it's critical for my spiritual well-being. I need good fiction for my own good, if that makes any sense. A metafiction can't produce experience like this precisely because it's shining a spotlight on the mechanics of fiction writing itself. It's like taking you backstage and you see all the crew setting up the sets and the prop person and everybody getting in and out of new costumes, and the illusion is gone. And so, it's intellectually interesting to go behind the scenes. Yes, intellectually interesting. And Maya was intellectually interesting, but spiritually a little dry, to be honest, which is ironic because the book characters are considering all these big existential questions. But because the fictional illusion has been deliberately imperfected by the author in order to show this illusory nature of fiction writing and fiction reading, but because of that, I wasn't able to connect with the characters emotionally. I felt a little distanced from them and their problems. In the end, therefore, my jury is out. It's still deliberating the question of whether or not it's necessary for readers to read metafiction. Badly written fiction can do some of the same work, I think, because badly written fiction exposes how the writer, by making bad choices, fails to create a satisfying, a compelling illusion and ritual reading experience. But my jury is also noting that metafiction is well written. And therefore it still gives the reader an intellectual exercise. Bad writing may be so bad that the only thing you can say is that the writer wasn't really thinking enough. There is thinking and crafting in metafiction, but it appeals to the mind more than it does to the heart or the soul. I mean, you could also read a work of nonfiction that is talking about the subject of writing fiction, or a work of literary criticism, perhaps. That picks things apart and certainly reminds you that there's a real person that puts words together, and that by putting them together creates this illusion. So it seems that there are many different ways of getting this same behind-the-scenes experience, if you will, this perspective on the whole fiction reading ritual. The advantage of getting the perspective from metafiction is that metafiction could be more entertaining and engaging either than nonfiction or badly written fiction. But, I wouldn't say that was guaranteed. And that is the review done. In my description box is a list of Romani authors. I felt that was an important thing for me to do, was to go find some names of Romani authors and consider reading some of their fiction to fill that gap and maybe dispel some of those stereotypes that I've been holding on to. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining me again in this review. In a few days' time, you should get a non-fiction review, because I need to tell you about that biography of Dante that I spent so much time nattering about in the tag video. So I shall see you then, everyone. In the meantime, I hope you have good reading and take care of yourself. Bye-bye.